Scientists are screaming from the rooftops about us avoiding going over a 2-degree rise in the temperature of the planet. Why are they so worried about that? If we go over that amount of warming, there are feedback loops in our ecosystems, tipping points that climate change could spin out of control, and it happens like that.
There are switches that can be tripped where suddenly you are in brand new territory and you don't even begin to know what to do about it. This is not a linear kind of problem that we're dealing with. This is very much an exponential kind of problem.
Right now, we're on the edge of 3 major tipping points. The first one is the Arctic ice cap. That ice cap's like a mirror. It reflects the sun's light off of the Earth and keeps it from warming us up. But as it melts, you get a smaller mirror, which means a warmer Earth, which means more melting, which means more climate change. Another example is Arctic methane. We've got a gigantic amount of methane gas frozen into the tundra, and it is 50 times as toxic as CO2 is. It's CO2 on steroids. As it warms, and that methane gets released, it then causes global warming to get worse, which means it warms more, which means more methane released, which means worse warming, and all of that process spins out of control. Another example of a tipping point is ocean acidification. As you get more CO2 in the atmosphere, a lot of it actually is going into our oceans. And a lot of stuff, like plankton, can't live in that kind of acidified water. And plankton is the basis of the food chain. If the plankton die, we lose the whole ocean ecosystem.
These kinds of feedback loops and tipping points are what keep me up at night, that we will hit one before we're able to turn things around.
Hello. Okay. Now, I hope the UN will be kind enough to factor in the fact that we're starting late and we get 30 minutes. Today's press conference is sponsored by the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative, and we will focus mostly on the science part. If I had to pay a few words of respect to the faith part of our name, I'd say we all need to pray about this Arctic methane emergency because, as I've said to many of you here, this is the smoking gun going off. If we don't deal with the methane emergency, we have very slim prospects of survival in my personal estimate. Collaborative organization. Today, before I introduce our guests, I will give some expert testimony, shall we say, from Dr. Peter Wadhams, a professor of ocean physics from Cambridge University. He's the head of their Polar Ocean Physics Group. He's been researching the Arctic ice cap since the 1970s. He has over 300 peer-reviewed papers published, and he is one of the world's foremost authorities on the conditions and physics of the Arctic sea ice. And here are a few remarks from Dr. Wadhams on what the Arctic sea ice portends and the loss of the Arctic sea ice portends for humanity.
At the moment, we have to rely on Shakova and Semiletov, who've been doing that work, and they have then expert knowledge of the seabed conditions, and they're the ones who are estimating the 50 gigatons. So that could be revised up or down if further work is done in that area.
And do you think civilization could survive a 50 gigaton release of methane?
No, I don't think it can. I think that if you look at the existing predictions of global warming rates, what's kind of eerie is the fact that the business as usual projections, even the cautious ones produced by IPCC, are still giving us about 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and with 2 degrees has been taken arbitrarily as the level beyond which nasty things happen. I don't know why it's 2 degrees, but that will be reached by the middle of the century, and 4 degrees by the end of the century. Now, 4 degrees, people who've calculated what that would do to food production, to die-off of forests, to acceleration of warming due to various extra feedbacks that kick in, that the general conclusion is pretty dire, that if you get to 4 degrees of warming, then collapse of civilization is what's going to happen, because the world won't be able to sustain anywhere near its present population. So the result will be chaos and warfare. So that's just that. The eerie thing is that that's predicted by the IPCC report, but the projection of warming by the end of the century is 4 degrees. But nowhere do they state at all that 4 degrees is a catastrophe for economically and socially for the planet. And now with this Arctic methane, you're simply adding another element to the warming, even if it's only an extra 0.6. That brings forward the date at which catastrophic warming is achieved by maybe 20 years.
Very serious situation.
A third one which I'm concerned about a lot, in fact I'm concerned with doing fieldwork in this area at the moment, is whether or not we might have a massive methane outbreak. We're really concerned about the Arctic offshore, that the continental hydrates under the seabed, and the fear is that this could all happen quite precipitately, that the melting or thawing of the seabed permafrost will allow a lot of methane to be released in a short time, and that would have a very big impact on global warming. The methane is a very powerful global warming gas, and its impact develops within a very few years, not like carbon dioxide, which is a powerful greenhouse gas but which stays around for a century. Methane does its thing and then vanishes after about 9 or 10 years. But that thing would consist of perhaps 0.6 of a degree extra warming for the planet just within a few years, which would be catastrophic in relation to the amount of warming we've had already and that we're going to get. It's an extra boost to global warming which we could do without, but which we're quite likely to be subjected to.
When do you suspect that this could actually, what is the earliest that this could start to be noticed, the effect of this? Well,
the field workers who are studying the emissions of methane from the Arctic shelves are already seeing big increases in the emission rate. We're seeing big plumes of methane coming out of the seabed in the summer, just like an oil blowout, and gas coming up from an oil blowout. But it's big fields of methane gas being released from the seabed, forming big bubble plumes that are being detected. Now, until recently, with offshore methane, the effect if it's released on the planet would be equally catastrophic or almost as catastrophic, because the amount of warming would be immediate and large. But the probability that it will happen is quite large. I mean, it's I would say it's about 50%, because we're seeing the permafrost melting and we're seeing the methane already being released. So it's not a low probability, high catastrophe risk. It's a high catastrophe, high probability risk, which means we should be studying that intensely.
The feeling of a great catastrophe, could it happen as close as 2-3 years' time?
Well, we'll see. I think in 2 or 3 years' time we'll have seen some changes that are visible. Like I think the summer sea ice will have disappeared by then, and we'll see an increase or a continuing instability in the weather systems of the planet, which seem to be related to sea ice retreat and warming of the Arctic. So all of these extremely weird winter weather systems we get in Europe and North America, they'll continue and maybe get worse. So there'll be a gradual worsening, but I think when things are gradually changing, even if that gradualness is quite rapid, you really don't notice anything in a single year. And I think it will, by 10 years' time, we'll be really in the soup, I think.
You're going to the Arctic now. What do you propose to do, and what are you hoping that you won't find or will find?